Thank you so much, Dr. Kelly, joining us from US. And it's again a possibility and opportunity for people, for our audience to have people like you, expertise and your dexterity. And you've been working on environmental issues and policy demands with the US government, and your experience is tremendous. And it's really awesome to have you on this platform. And today we are going to cover a wonderful topic, but your expertise and your research, your academic skill will certainly help us. And you've been sort of at this point of time in US. So we are going to cover a wonderful topic today. It says like a virtual exchange of SDGs, how students are building a global future without leaving home. So this is what we are going to cover today. So I would like to move on to my first question, which is certainly a very important question. Says, with the US stepping back from SDGs, how are virtual exchange keeping global learning alive?
That's a really good question, and it's certainly one that I asked myself after the announcement of the U.S. stepping back in the United Nations meeting, announcing that we would no longer support the SDGs. That was in March. So I really scratched my head as a professor. I'm retired, but I am still teaching at Johns Hopkins University. So I scratched my head. How am I going to teach this class on environmental decision making? And I came to the conclusion that it's more important. It's actually a more important class than when we had all the regulations and all the wonderful guidance manuals from EPA and Department of Interior and many of the other agencies on how to accomplish the SDGs. So now I think it's even more important that we work with our learners and our management people in the government and in private sector to help them deal with uncertainty and to look at the type of management style that they want to have for themselves. Because even though there used to be regulations guiding them on accomplishing the SDGs, they can still do so. It will be harder. There will be barriers. And so what I teach my learners is, and they're all in professional positions on the environment, and they're all working in different ways with the SDGs, is you have to think about what kind of manager do you want to be? What kind of legacy do you want to leave? For me, the legacy is to assist these students, these professional students who have come back and are still working in dealing with uncertainty. How are you? You're going to have some discretion, okay? So it may not be a requirement, but where are your values? What are you committed to? And in that discretionary decision making, what do you want to accomplish?
This is certainly an important area in how you train your students, and it's always a possibility and opportunity for a platform also to have people like you with outstanding experience. And you're also working like UN, a lot of projects and programs, and directly involved with the UN. So you certainly your expertise will help. Now, I would like to move on to my second question. A very important question is, how can virtual classrooms offer a more inclusive and accessible platforms, especially for students with disabilities? Very important question.
This is, and I'm from this community, so it's actually a passion of mine to make sure that we deliver learning opportunities that have accommodations and accessibility. So, for instance, when I joined this community about 10 years ago, I graduated into it. I was not born into it. I shifted into an asynchronous model online of teaching all of my classes as a requirement. And so I actually pioneered several techniques in how we can still do game simulations. We could still do augmented virtual reality in my courses with people that have challenges to sight or mobility or neurodiversity or learning issues. So what this does by using virtual exchange, which is the ability to do what we're just doing right now, perhaps in a more structured manner for learning with learning outcomes and inside of a course, to make sure that our students do not have to travel abroad, do not have to experience expensive or time consuming or things that conflict with their work-life balance. Instead, we can do everything with some creativity by the professor and some understanding of the different technologies and ways of accommodating students with disabilities. I have many examples of students who actually began taking most of my courses because they knew I was good at finding accommodations and being creative. And so virtual exchange, where we put together global students from around the world. I've worked with 5-6 continents now of professors bringing their students into a virtual environment where we actually have the students work together in virtual teams. They work on virtual projects. I just played on Saturday a role simulation game that was on 3 continents on how to site an offshore wind farm. A very important component of the energy piece of the SDGs is the renewable energies. So, and we had students with different abilities in that course. And both myself and other students had to get accommodations. And so you can do this. It is not expensive the way it's portrayed sometimes to faculty and inside of universities. Most of the time, it's being creative and finding alternatives. And I tell my faculty that I work with, they say, well, how can you do this inside of a course? And I said, very easily, the goal is the learning outcome of the course, not if you did it on paper or if you did it orally, whatever the assignment is. It's achieving the learning outcome. And once faculty inside of courses look at focusing on what they want to accomplish in their course, you can find alternatives for everyone to be involved. And especially students with disabilities are very keen on meeting others from other continents, other students, other colleagues, other learners. And they're very keen on doing this because often they cannot attend a study abroad. They cannot go on a field trip. It's not accessible for them. When we teach and we bring students into our courses from around the world in a virtual exchange environment, like the one we're in right now using Zoom, disabled students are opened up to meeting people outside of the US, to working together in a multicultural, multidisciplinary way. And so I've written a book on this. I have many articles on this, and a book that just came out March 5th with podcasts you can find. And we have a chapter on disability and the role-playing games of the experience firsthand of a disabled student who led one of the games. And she was very successful in leading it virtually here online. I also have another book coming out that's going to have an entire section on disability and virtual exchange and the liberating nature that virtual exchange gives students who may have other limitations or work-life balance limitations.
It's important for all of us to learn that how a proper environment and ambience can be created for people with neurodiversity and people who have some disability in learning when it comes to learning, because learning must happen and you've been creating a good ambience environment for them. It's a wonderful possibility. Thanks a lot. Would like to move on to my third question, which is again one question says, how do you believe that online collaborations and stronger than traditional international exchanges in today's polarized world?
Study abroad and field trip visits abroad are wonderful experiences for students. They really are kind of those that activity that you always look back on in your educational pathway as something that was really profound. However, what we're finding is many students cannot afford either the time away from their work-life families and balances, or the mobility and the issues of traveling abroad with students who need ADA accommodations or other accommodations to participate and to travel. And I travel abroad, and it is very difficult. I've been left in wheelchairs, ready an airport ramp around the world, including the US. So, what this virtual exchange technique does is it breaks down those barriers. And now we have some additional barriers. We are having a growing polarization of nations around the world, including the United States. It's harder to actually travel based on your culture and nationality of what country you are from. So it's going to be very difficult, adding more barriers to getting to know people from around the world. So instead of going, for instance, to Brazil, which is about 12 to 14 hours from the United States, depending on where you're located, and very expensive for the airplane ticket, instead of going there, we do multiple projects online using these kinds of these virtual exchange opportunities, where students can meet each other and work together and create a project together. Same thing as we're seeing, we have students that would never be able to travel, for instance, to either the Middle East or Australia or India for costs and time. And so we're getting more polarized. Student visas for international students are becoming scrutinized, and there's a high uncertainty right now. So we avoid all of that. In fact, during COVID, when we had the pandemic, I was doing virtual exchange courses with the Navajo Nation, and they also shut down like the rest of us, and it was a profound experience, a transformational experience for my students and the Navajos, because it was the only time both my students and the Navajo Nation students got to dialogue face to face through virtual exchanges to allow them to converse with others. And then they got to converse with others and work on projects that didn't even skip a beat. We kept going during COVID, and we will keep going during the polarization of the nations around the world and the wars and the conflicts. And so this can be a very powerful tool in learning and getting our students some intercultural skills in working together, especially on the SDGs, which demand intercultural skills for us to work together as a collective in collective decision making. So I have high hopes. This field of virtual exchange is expanding. There's journals and books and conferences that are plentiful and growing. And so more and more we're seeing instructors, professors using virtual exchange inside their classroom. It does not require any exchange of funds. It does not require any cost to the students. It does not require any memorandum of agreement. Every professor grades their own students, and no exchange of tuition. So it's very easy to set up. I think the biggest barrier is faculty tend to be a little apprehensive in trying to get a partner. But there's a number of ways you could do this. And in fact, I call it one of the ways, the email door knock. I've sent blind emails to like for instance, with the Navajo Nation, I sent a blind email. If I'm going to talk about the remediation of waste, nuclear waste, which I do in my nuclear classes, I have to have the Navajos there. Mm-hmm. And so I sent an email and got them to join the class and we work together. Our students work together now.
Because our online collaborations as compared to traditional international exchange and polarized world. Now, I would like to move on to my fourth question, which is also an important question, since how are students reshaping their worldviews when they work on sustainability goals with peers they have never met in person?
Really advanced question. What we do is we begin by training the students at the home institution, both professors at their home institution, on intercultural skills. So before they even meet, They have to develop some self-assessments. My students go through 4 layers of self-assessment to see how do they understand power, what stereotypes do they have in their language and their behavior, the role of silence, the role of slang, jokes that are perhaps not understood across cultures. So we start there. And then we move into the students just meeting each other several times without the faculty member. So we give some prompts and the students get to talk about whatever they want to talk about. And they're very active in this, sports, all sorts of political issues, social issues. They actually have some very common concerns when it comes to schoolwork and tuition. And so we let them talk and we let them build relationships on Zoom together without the faculty member. And then there's an assignment involved. And this is where they actually come together. And so their worldview, we measure their worldviews. We actually assess their worldviews using the new ecological paradigm. It's a survey that's well known since the 1970s. And it's only 15 questions. It's very basic. And we assess their worldviews. And then they come together and talk about that assessment before the assignment. And then they work on the assignment together. I think from the feedback I get from students, and I've been doing this 10 years, and it's been over 1,200 students that I've assessed worldviews on inside of this course, because I taught quite a bit before my retirement. And so all my classes were global, and all of them, we worked on the worldviews, and all of them were related to the SDGs in some manner. The students found, surprisingly enough, some countries were more closely related to their environmental worldview than others. And we've published this work. In fact, we found the Navajo Nation was more similar to Brazil in how they viewed the environment. The Navajo Nation in Brazil were very different than Morocco when we measured those students. And the US, of course, turned out to be most like Europe. Okay, so we had several European countries, traditional Western European countries, and their environmental worldviews were very much like the US's. So the students, and they actually, it was wonderful. I had this programmed into their learning platform through Caltrex and Excel, and the graphs were immediately generated after they answered the 15 questions by country. And so they immediately saw the similarities and differences. And then they met and talked about this. And so the goal here really is to get the learner to understand kind of where they're at on their own worldviews, where they might hold biases, where they could improve through extending a little bit more patience and intercultural competencies and understanding others. And ultimately, one of the problems with the SDGs is working across nations, working across cultures. And so this gives the students, before hopefully we cut them loose in the workplace, or if they are coming back from the workplace to advance their education, an opportunity in the classroom where it's very safe. It's a very safe place to question yourself, to analyze your own worldviews, and to talk with others with different worldviews. So I really enjoy that part of my courses. And even in retirement, as I said, I'm teaching this summer. We just ran the offshore wind farm game, and we had Morocco, Italy, and the US, and they really got to see the differences and similarities across these different countries.
Worldviews, the sustainability goals with peers, they've never met. This is altogether a very different thing and has to be understood by us as a new upcoming generation. Now, I would like to move on to my fifth question, which is also a rapid question, but very modern questions is, what would you say to critics who see virtual exchange as second best to study abroad?
It's a little bit in a previous question, but study abroad as a learning tool and virtual exchange learning tool are very different tools. They have different learning outcomes, different goals. both. In fact, my students oftentimes do both. Many of the study abroads will have a virtual exchange component before the students go and when the students come back. So they're very different things. And study abroad, you're more immersed in somebody else's culture, and because it's geographically based, and so you're learning sometimes language, culture, all at once. And a lot of times the study abroad stay with the homogenous group of the university students they came with. They don't necessarily do a lot of hands-on project work together as a team. Whereas in virtual exchange, your grade is jointly dependent on your teammates and achieving your project goal. And so there is perhaps different learning on intercultural skills in both. If you can do both, that would be ideal. And if you can go on a study abroad, certainly, if you can afford the time and effort and time away from your country, that's a wonderful experience. However, the data shows that even my university even led a campaign for donations to send all levels of students, because most of the time study abroad is by middle and upper income students in the US because of the costs and the time. And so when we ran a funding mechanism to get other students, all students, able to go to study abroad, the data didn't change. It did not change, meaning that it's also work-life balance. It's your curriculum can be very difficult to step out of your curriculum, to step out of your daily routine and be away in another country, and just the cost of passports and other things. So what's interesting is I don't view these as a dualism, as either or one better or one less. Virtual exchange is accessible. That's the bottom line. If your professor has it in a course, and you will get intercultural exposure and build some of your skills up in intercultural competencies. And if you get to go on a study abroad, I think that's wonderful. And if you can do both throughout your curriculum, that's great. But if you cannot, the virtual exchange is the one that reaches disabled students, all incomes of students, all work-life balances of students. It's more egalitarian than perhaps the study abroad exposure and experience.
You picked up today and sort of addressed a very important topic, virtual exchange and SDGs, and global learning environment, and how it's keeping global learning alive, and virtual classrooms offering inclusive learning possibilities for neurodiversity students, or maybe people, students with disability. And you all talked about online collaborations is stronger than traditional uh, educational exchanges, and then students worldviews, sustainability goals. And then finally, you talked about critics, like how do they see second best study options. So it's a wonderful discussion, and I'm sure the audience will draw major chunk of benefit by listening to your perspectives and why you have just spoken. So
Well,
it's going to be a wonderful possibility. So once again, thank you so much joining this platform. As you're already familiar, the resource platform where we step through noise to cause you most relevant and reliable sociological interpretations and inputs to make the database more better for our society in order to enhance the very possible dimensions of our societies. So that's the reason we keep conducting interviews, international and national. Once again, thank you so much, ma'am, joining us from the US.